Hello viewers, and a warm welcome to the show this evening. I am your host, Chef Andy, and very importantly, I will begin by introducing the guest on the show today. Before we begin, Megan.
Thank you, Chef Andy. My name is Megan Muthoni. I'm an advocate by training, and I love to cook because I love the amazing things you can do in the kitchen with food, and you can experiment, and food allows you to express yourself. So I'm just here to learn from Chef Andy what I can add into my kitchen.
Perfect. Now, very importantly, before we continue, I will of course introduce the ingredients and the dish for today, just to give you an idea of what to expect for the show. Now we're going to be making a very simple baked omelette, and for that purpose we're going to be using some very handy ingredients, which I'll of course begin by introducing from the very front. You will of course require one medium-sized white onion, finely chopped. You will also include to that a bit of some garlic cloves, about 3-4 pieces. You'll also require a tablespoon of Parmesan cheese and about half a cup of grated cheddar. You'll also require 1 tablespoon of butter, about 100 grams of some feta cheese. You'll also require about half a cup of some chopped sliced button mushrooms, about 1 sesame bun or any particular bread of choice, just to be able to serve with. You also require some salt and some black peppercorns to season, about 4 whole eggs. You'll also require some baby spinach or just regular spinach that has of course been pre-cooked. And of course, last but not least, you will also require some milk. Now before we begin, we'll of course give you this opportunity to sit back, relax and unwind. And if you're going to be taking notes for this recipe, then this is your chance to grab pen and paper. So see you in a little bit. And you just basically need to fry that for about 1 minute to 2 minutes. And while you do so, you'll also add your onions.
Okay, why the white onion instead of the purple one?
Now, one thing I've grown to be fond of white onions is the fact that they're a little more gentle on the tongue.
Okay.
They're also very fragrant, and they also go very well with some ingredients.
Yeah.
So for instance, if you're going to be using white onions, I wouldn't recommend using a white onion in a stew, but more of maybe dishes that you're pretty much frying a little bit and you just want a bit of flavor and just a bit of cooking on them.
Okay.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just grasping or tuning into the show, we've pretty much begun by introducing the ingredients, and I also mentioned the guest for today, which is a very important guest on the show. As I mentioned, her name is Megan, an advocate, a big food lover, and a very big fan of our show. I've of course managed to convince her to join us on the show today, just to be able to share some very simple handy tips on a very light dinner option. Now, Megan, before we begin, I'll of course ask you to turn on the gas stove for us.
Okay.
And while she does so, I'm just going to quickly grab some of the ingredients that we'll begin to work with. Right, now pan on the heat. Now, Megan, I don't know if you're a big fan of omelettes.
I do. Though I have an allergic, but I do prepare them actually for my friends and a lot of people who come to my house for breakfast. They are a must to be in the menu. So
then this is one beautiful recipe that you'll be able to boast even if you're not a fan of.
Exactly. Yeah? And I've not made eggs with mushrooms before, so this is quite also exciting for me, yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So there's something definitely new for you to learn
Yes,
today.
there's something new. And
Perfect.
I have not also used a bit of the... I see you have cheeses, so I think I've just used the cheddar cheese on omelette, and that's just about it.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, definitely cheese is a very good addition to an omelette. Very important to mention. Now, I'm also going to be using 2 varieties of cheese, one that is feta and one that is cheddar. Now, the beautiful thing about the blending of the 2 cheeses, it actually creates a very beautiful feel in the mouth.
Okay.
For the fact that feta is of course very creamy and very milky. cheddar is of course also very, very salty. So it
Yeah.
also gives a very, very beautiful double balance.
Okay.
And of course, just to give that beautiful saltiness to the dish, we're going to be incorporating some Parmesan cheese.
Okay.
All right. Now, we're going to begin the process very, very simply by adding a bit of butter to our pan.
Okay.
And I'll just hand you that.
Right.
Right, so very, very importantly, always start with your aromatics. So I like to start with my garlic.
Okay.
So this I'm just going to chop very, very coarsely. Doesn't have to be too fine.
So how long did it take you to like master how to
master
chop that way
knife
without
skills?
actually cutting yourself? I have
Well,
tried that in my kitchen. Bad results.
Now I'll give
It's a
you.
crime scene.
I'll give you the secret behind it.
Okay.
What happens is, as you cook professionally, this is pretty much the only tool a chef requires.
Okay.
So what happens is, even right through training, right up to where I am, this is the only tool I was taught to use in abundance.
All right.
Because pretty much everything around us revolves around the knife. You'll always have to chop something, trim something, open something. So what happens is, the idea behind learning how to use a knife is basically using a knife more often.
Okay.
So basically, just like a soldier uses a gun, a chef uses a knife.
Okay.
We pretty much perfect it from the more frequently we use them.
Okay.
And of course, also to mention for some of you at home who may be wondering how to perfect your knife skills, there's also some very, very good handy tips on YouTube. You can of course be able to just search on knife skills.
Okay.
There's very, very many different techniques of using knives. And you can also be able to find different techniques of using different knives. So for instance, you do get knives, for instance, like this one, which is a professional chef knife, but you do get different kinds of knives. So I would say picking the right knife for you is pretty much what makes a knife experience worth it. So for instance, a knife like this, for me, I could pretty much do anything with it, and it's also sizable enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it in the design of the knife, or
actually
is the knife heavier at the handle and lighter?
It's a bit of both. First of all, it's a fact that it's also one consistent steel design.
Okay.
So what you realize is the knife does not really have rivets on the side. So basically, the handles don't move.
Okay.
As most of our household knives
Yes,
are.
exactly.
So the beautiful thing about this is the fact that it is of course also very, very stable. And the fact that it's also one piece makes sure that you actually have the best grip.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so back to the cooking.
Yes.
Once your butter is brown, you begin by adding some garlic.
Okay.
And you just basically need to fry that for about 1 minute to 2 minutes. And while you do so, you'll also add your onions.
Okay, why the white onion instead of the purple one?
Now, one thing I've grown to be fond of white onions is the fact that they're a little more gentle on the tongue.
Okay.
They're also very, very fragrant, and they also go very, very well with some ingredients.
Yeah.
So for instance, if you're going to be using white onions, I wouldn't recommend using a white onion in a stew, but more of maybe dishes that you're pretty much frying a little bit and you just want a bit of flavor and just a bit of cooking on them.
Okay.
And another thing is they're not also as pungent as red onions.
Exactly.
The only problem with white onions is of course the cost. So for a lot of home viewers out there, I know some of you pretty much may not also have the luxury of using white onion.
Yeah.
But I will recommend, if you do have a chance, try and buy maybe a kilo of onions when you buy, and maybe buy like half a kilo of white and just try the two.
Actually, that is what I do.
Yeah, it's actually the best way to do
yeah.
it. And of course, not forgetting to mention, you can of course also use onions such as leeks in this recipe. You can also use spring onions, and you can also use chives as well.
Okay.
So there's very many different varieties, but I'll always recommend whichever particular one you try with. It's probably going to maybe give you an idea of where you want to use it.
Okay.
So the beautiful thing about the white onion is basically the fragrance. It's not as potent as a purple onion. So what I could recommend is, I would suggest maybe try sauteing a white onion and a red onion with different dishes and just take a record of each. Okay. You'll pretty much be able to know which one fits where. That's the only secret.
I think that's why I love cooking. There's no specific
you can never have enough
rules to eat, like it's not limited.
Rules. Even with the order of frying ingredients, on occasion I also change them around if I get a chance to cook at home. I do get situations whereby I'll try and do something a little different and
Okay.
see what happens.
Okay.
And we actually had it with a guest on the show some time back. She insisted that she likes lemon with a sauce, and we tried it, and it was really,
It
really
was
nice.
really amazing.
So I will, of course, recommend, even for those of you who are watching, do take your chance and try out your own way around your own cooking. Remember, we're, of course, also limited to cook a certain way when we go out for dinner or
Yeah.
we eat out.
Yeah.
But of course, it never necessarily means that you need to cook like the chef or the cook that you learned it from.
Okay.
Do try and break the rules every now and then. You may actually be able to discover the next best recipe for whatever you're making.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Right, so once your onions are sweated out, so you
Yeah.
cook that for about 5-6 minutes.
You add the mushrooms.
Then you add your mushrooms.
So what type of mushrooms are these?
So we're using button mushrooms for this recipe.
Okay.
I do actually have a loving for porcini mushrooms, but for the reason that I like to use ingredients that are easier for most of our viewers to find locally.
Okay. Yeah.
I like to get the button mushrooms. These are pretty much more oftenly found in
Yeah,
supermarkets.
yeah.
So this is a very, very easy mushroom alternative to be able to work with. And another thing is they also really, really go well with eggs. They've got a nice, beautiful, they've got a butteriness to them in texture.
Okay.
And that combined with the butter and the white onions just generally gives it a beautiful finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So have you just washed them? They are raw and you just
No,
put
what I
them
did
here?
is I peeled them.
Okay.
So basically on the next episode where we use mushrooms, I'll be able to show you a very, very simple way of peeling them.
Okay.
On many occasions, most of us are of course tempted to wash them.
Yeah.
Now what I find about washing mushrooms, at times you can, of course, it's also very easy to contract bacteria.
Okay.
So what happens is if you're going to wash mushrooms, be sure to wash them under running water.
Okay.
And allow them to dry maybe on some serviettes or some kitchen paper.
Okay.
So allow them to dry as fast as possible. That way they of course won't start harboring bacteria.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're pretty much going to continue frying those for about 4 to 5 minutes, right up until your mushrooms are almost golden brown in color. And as you do so,
So the mushroom cook is fast, like.
Exactly.
Okay.
The mushrooms don't really take a lot of time they don't actually take time to cook. There's actually instances where mushrooms can be served very raw.
Okay.
So basically, if you're looking at the Chinese way of cooking,
Yeah.
there's situations where mushrooms are going to be used or maybe cooked very, very slightly. And this is basically just to preserve the nutrients. As most of you viewers at home, some of you may also be very unaware, especially when working with vegetables, very important to try and not overcook your vegetables. Allow them to cook just until they're basically edible.
Okay.
And they're just free from the bacteria. And now what happens on most occasions is some of us overcook, and what happens is you also come up with a totally different flavor.
Okay.
So the idea is to just saute them long enough to give them just a bit of color, because what happens is they of course they actually cook very, very lightly. They're just like fresh herbs. So you definitely need a little bit of cooking time for mushrooms.
Okay.
Right, now on to the next step. Very, very simple method of using liquids, especially for such a recipe.
Okay.
Now, on most occasions, I know when the pan goes dry, most of us will be tempted to add water.
Yes.
On some, yeah, you'll be tempted to add
on some
water.
meals you will add water.
Now, what happens is when working with, especially if you're doing a dish that incorporates maybe a different liquid, such as milk, you can actually use the milk as well as a
Okay.
we normally call it a degreaser.
Okay.
Yes.
Ah.
So you can add about 3-4 tablespoons of some milk. And this is basically also going to do two things. It's also going to allow for the mixture or rather the flavors to combine in your pan.
Yeah.
And it keeps the mushrooms nice and velvety.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Now, as that continues to cook, we're also going to be incorporating some baby spinach.
All right.
So
where do you get these? Because they're not in our daily
Yeah,
our usual interactions with Mama Mboga, or you don't just go and ask for baby spinach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now for this particularly, I normally have someone who supplies them to me. So
Okay.
I'm very fond of buying from growers.
Yeah.
So what I could recommend is, if you can't of course find baby spinach, you can use regular spinach.
Okay.
Just boil it, chop it up, of course, after...
When you say boil it, is it just how long do you have to have it on water?
Because
because it's very soft.
So what I would recommend, if you're going to be making, if you're looking at making it very, very light, maybe cook your spinach in water, and making sure that the spinach is under the water level. Cook it for about 10 minutes in hot water and then drain it very quickly under some cold water in the tap. And then you'll basically be able to get it to that texture that will combine. So will it still have, it should still have the bouncy kind of? Well, it won't be too bouncy. Well, if you're working with local spinach, it will of course shrink and it will of course be very, very hard to get that texture. So then what you do is after chopping, you'd have to squeeze out the water completely for it to be a bit fluffy. Now, for those of you who may of course be wondering where to get baby spinach, you can of course you can find it in the high-end supermarkets within town. It's also very, very hard to find at times because it's also limited in supply. And I can be frank, chefs love baby spinach over regular spinach. It actually is. It's very, very different in flavor. I think you'll be able to tell after we're done making all this.
I've not.
It's very buttery in flavor as well. And it's also, it doesn't actually ooze out as much juice as our local spinach. So actually, if you steam this, you may actually steam it for maybe half a minute because it will cook very, very quickly. Very fast. So very important to mention that if you're going to be adding spinach to this dish, add it at the very end, just before your seasoning, before it comes off the heat. So you can of course alternatively check the high-end supermarkets. If you can of course find it at your regular mama mboga, just go for regular spinach, just steam it, chop it up nicely and squeeze out the water. And then you can proceed to add it to your mushroom mixture and it will just work just the same. Right, so into our pan goes our spinach. So this is of course very coarsely chopped. This is for reasons that we do want it to give the omelette a little bit of texture. And this is of course also going to give it a nice beautiful appearance once the mixture goes into a baking dish. Right, and as we finish that off, we'll of course finish by seasoning with a bit of some crushed black peppercorns. You can of course use black pepper powder for the same reason. And of course, very importantly, a bit of salt. Now something also I would love to ask, whenever you have your eggs, are you fond of having them baked or you prefer the frying technique? I actually just fry them. You just fry them? I've not baked eggs before. So today is going to be the first opportunity. Yes, today is my first time to bake eggs, so I'm quite excited to see how you're going to go about it. So there's definitely some fresh new things you're going to learn on the show. Now, also something maybe to just touch on the advocate part of your life, of your lifeline. About how long have you been a magistrate? An advocate, yes. How long have you been doing this for? I've been an advocate now for going on to 5 years. Nice. Yes. Congratulations. Yes. That's a very good. Although within the profession, I'd be considered still a young advocate, somewhat because but 5 years now. That's very good. How do you find the line of work? Very, very. For me, it's fun. It's actually what I always wanted to be since I was young, and I love it because there's the human-to-human interaction. You know, and I get to like engage with people directly, and at the end of it all, I think the thing that the thrill that it gives me is that I get that kind of like direct impact on an individual. I think that's it. I think that's what excites me about being an advocate. It gives me the opportunity to actually provide a solution for somebody. And even if I can do that in the morning, my day is done. Your day By the way, my day is done. I woke up, as soon as you wake up, you're done. In fact, if I just provide for you a solution, I think I'm pretty done for that day. That's very, actually, that's something new I will try. I'll actually try that with my cooking and see if it works. If it works. Now, something also to ask, did you get into the law industry as a passion, or was there someone who was an influence or maybe a direct source of this interest for yourself? Actually, by the way, it's funny. I got in, I would say now today, 5 years in, it's passion, because growing up, I didn't exactly have like someone I looked up to. That person is an advocate and I want to be like them. I didn't have that. You woke up one day and I did not have that, because all the people being around me when I was growing up were nurses,
doctors, engineers, but
which is a typical stigma. We
Exactly.
grew up
So
with,
I
yeah.
didn't exactly have like somebody who would like even tell me this is what this entails and everything. Yeah. Yeah. So,
All right.
so it's passion. It's passion, and yeah, it's passion. And then as I got into it, I think I just loved it. I fell in love. Yes,
that's very, very
I fell in love.
any pointers you can share maybe with the young viewers out there? Maybe there's someone
who
watching
wants
the
to
show
be
and
an
they're actually
advocate.
thinking about being an advocate
Yes,
tomorrow, maybe
yes.
joining an institution.
Yes.
What's a few words you'd share with them?
This is the thing. You have to know, like, you have to be sure of. First of all, I think the most important part is to like know who you are in this sense. Like, what is it that I want to bring on the table? You understand? And then why am I pursuing this? What am I doing this for? And then now, patience is something you have to like just have or master, because it's a long program. It's around 6 years and maybe 6 years and a half now. Now that if they introduce the pre-bar exam, it will be 6 to 7 years now, because you have the undergraduate, which is 4 years. Yes.
Period, yeah?
And then you have, after you finish your 4 years, you still have to go to the Kenya School of Law for the diploma. Now that is the advocates training program. Yes, so which is intense.
Definitely something that you need patience.
Yeah, you have to be
don't
patience,
just get into
exactly.
law for the fame and for the glamour.
and not to forget,
exactly,
and not to forget like the undergraduate program, you have like 54 units or about 60 units you have to cover within the 4 years, and they are intense because there's bulk data you need to go through, you know. Yeah, and then you go to the advocates training program for the 2 years, then you have a marathon over 1 year, and you're covering so much. Yes, and then you have now the other attachment here. It's an intense program, but yeah, I think so. But if you're clear within yourself,
with
yes,
inside
exactly.
You wouldn't be able to count 7 years.
Exactly.
Because you're counting.
Yeah.
You're coming closer to your career.
Yes.
And you're moving further from what you are.
Yeah. Yes.
It's very, very handy. So for those of you who are tuning in from home, you have of course heard it from Megan. Definitely needs a bit of passion, a bit of patience, and of course some willpower from inside you. And you never know, you could actually be the next best advocate out there.
Exactly.
Perfect. Now Megan, we're going to take this off the heat now and pour it into a bowl, but we'll begin by turning that off completely.
Okay.
So we're going to be pouring this into a dish that we're going to be baking the same in. So feel free to pour this straight into any dish that you're going to be throwing into the oven or baking in the oven with. It will of course save you the effort. It will also save you the dishes and the hustle and bustle. And this will of course also give you just enough time to allow for this to cool down before you proceed to add your egg mixture. So now that this is done, we're just going to rest it here at the back.
Okay.
You can just leave that there. Now next up, we're going to be making our egg mixture. So for this, you will require a big bowl and a whisk, very, very important. And now what we're going to do is we're basically going to begin the process by cracking about 4 eggs into our bowl. So it's actually a very,
I also
very
have
high
to
protein.
go to YouTube and look at egg skills, is it?
Definitely. So there is of course plenty.
Okay.
And as I said, just like advocates and lawyers like to show off in a courtroom, you know. As chefs, you don't really get so much to show off, so you can only use your hands.
Okay.
Yeah, and your knowledge.
Do advocates really show off?
Well, actually, you know, growing up, I always thought, or rather, it was always in my mind that people who are prefects and leaders in school were the only ones cut out to be lawyers and advocates. Which brings me to ask, were you ever in maybe a position of authority when you were a student? Were you ever a prefect or anything of the sort?
Just one time, I remember when I was in...
So I'm right.
No. Actually, this was very, what would I say, it was coincidental. I found myself because I was in class 7 and what happened is there was nominations and I was actually nominated to be the prefect, which it wasn't me presenting myself. So I found myself and I hated it. I hated managing people.
Then it helps today because now you're managing people. You're going to be getting into the thrill of somewhat managing people.
Yes, managing people, but involving them in the management. You see, that's the difference. Yes, because I felt the feeling that I got with being a prefect for the short while I was, because I hated it, was I needed to follow up on people and just be like, get on this, do this, do that,
Basically
do that. Please wake up, please leave today. I didn't feel like I wanted to give people reason why you should do this and that, it should be self-driven. So that's why I think I hated it. I really didn't like it.
Nice.
Yes.
Very, very good recap of your history. Now, of course, just to proceed with the recipe as we were, into the eggs goes a bit of some salt for seasoning. I'm also going to crush in some black peppercorns. And remember, very, very important that you actually take some time in whisking your mixture. Remember, the more air you incorporate into your mixture, the better your omelette is actually going to puff up. And as I mentioned as well, when working with eggs, very, very important that you make sure to combine your whites and your yolks. This way you can actually get a more even looking egg mixture. And remember, for some of you who also may be looking at making it very, very much heavier or much thicker and more intense, maybe in weight, you can of course also maybe incorporate maybe a little more egg yolks without the egg white, of course. This will of course make it much more denser. And if you're of course looking at simple pointers to make it much lighter, you can of course whisk your egg white separate, whisk your egg yolk separate, and then fold in your egg whites into that. And this is basically going to bring about that souffle effect. So it's actually going to give it a bit of volume. Now, of course, once that is mixed up or whipped up, proceed to add 1 cup of milk and just proceed to whisk the mixture for about another minute, which will of course take you to the next step. Very, very important that you begin to preheat your oven at this stage. So I'm just going to turn my timer on at the back. Now we're going to be baking this at about 160 to 180, making sure that at the end of the process, the egg is beautifully golden brown in color at the top and it's actually nicely puffed up. And for that reason, I'm also going to be using a clear bowl just for you to be able to see the difference of how the dish looks before it goes in. And you'll also be able to see the texture once it comes out of the oven. Now, we pretty much finished that. So all you need to do at this stage now is you're going to begin by pouring right at the center point of the bowl.
Why the center?
Now, I like to pour the mixture right at the center of the bowl for 2 reasons. It allows for the mixture to spread more evenly.
Okay.
And what happens is as you pour the mixture in, remember your ingredients are going to come up. So what happens is if you pour from one end, what will happen is you may actually push everything to one side as the current comes in.
Okay.
So when you pour right at the center, it actually cushions the effect and it shares the pressure evenly. So what happens is it escapes evenly right through the spaces.
Okay.
And everything all comes up at one go.
Okay.
So it's only just a very, very simple pointer.
Okay.
Right, now once that is done, very, very simple technique of finishing this off. We're going to be adding some cheese.
Okay.
So I'm going to begin by adding some Parmesan right over the top.
So what's the difference between Parmesan cheese and cheddar and the feta?
Now what happens with the cheeses do come with different varieties. Yeah, you can sprinkle that over. Now cheeses come in different textures and varieties, and this is basically based on the source of the milk that the cheese comes from.
Okay.
So for instance, you'll realize milk that comes from goat is not very high in milk solids or milk fat.
Okay.
So what happens is you'll actually now find that cheeses that are made from goat's milk or sheep's milk are very, very white in color.
Okay.
And cheeses that come from maybe the milk that comes from the cow of course has a little bit more fat content in the milk.
Yeah.
So that is basically why the cheese will have a little bit more color from cow's milk and much less color from sheep and goat's milk.
Okay.
And then for the Parmesan, as I mentioned, now Parmesan, of course, this takes a bit of time to mature.
All right.
And this is basically why at the end of the process, you'll actually realize it's actually almost much drier than the rest of the cheeses.
Okay.
So this takes up to maybe 2 to 3 years to mature. And that's on some extent even 5 to 6 to 10 years.
It's why it's very expensive.
And that is why it costs, because of the labor intensiveness that comes in with preparing the cheese.
Okay.
So this is of course very important also for you watching at home. As I mentioned, you're of course not restricted to working with just the cheeses we've mentioned. Do feel free to try your own variety, see what works for you. Of course, also be very vigilant on making sure that you also don't overspend with cheese. My best pointer is try a little bit of, usually, like if I look at the current trends in the city, you do get a lot of delis that sell cheese now. So what I would recommend is maybe go and buy like a small amount, or maybe ask the vendor that's at the station, tell them you want to buy the most minimal quantity. And for most places that I've found, they'll actually be able to weigh it to 100 grams.
Okay.
So you can maybe buy one every month or try one every week. Try each one as you continue. So, and if you pretty much do the maths, if you tried one cheese every month, you'd have 12 varieties of cheese.
Yes, by the end of the year.
Yeah. Which means in the span of maybe 3-4 years, you could actually have tasted all the cheese
all the cheeses there is.
So that is basically the trick I like to use. Okay. And then another thing is you can also do a bit of research on the cheese before you pick it.
Okay.
Maybe download or maybe pick out a recipe that you can try it with. And then another last tip I could share with the viewers, also do take a chance in traveling and seeing this wine and tasting events.
Yeah, because they always do them with cheese.
Because they always have cheese where they have wine.
Yes.
So if you ever hear of a wine tasting or a wine gala or a wine event, do make a point of visiting. And the beautiful thing about trying it that way, you may actually not pay for all the cheeses, so you get to taste more and buy less.
So what is the thing with wine and cheese? Why they go together well?
Well, I would say the traditional way of how cheese was enjoyed, it was normally served with wine.
Okay.
It was actually part and parcel of a meal.
Okay.
And what happens is because of I would say it's also something to do with the origin of the dish.
All right.
As the French have it, and the French being the biggest consumers of cheese next to the Spanish, very, very commonly you will find that the French will of course have wine on most of their dishes, and they have cheese on most of their dishes. So it ends up having that they always merge.
Okay.
And then another thing is also with the courses. You pretty much may find that you will find maybe cheese platters at the end of a French dinner course.
Okay.
So very, very commonly you will find that cheese is also served as an alternative to a dessert.
Yeah.
And just as as a trend continued to blossom and grow, people of course found it that you can actually move the cheese from the purpose that it was used for as a dinner finisher to maybe even a snack or a midday snack.
Yeah.
So then the trend, of course, has changed over time. I've also come to realize there's a lot of influence of cheese in a lot of cuisines locally.
Yes.
So even cuisines that did not use cheese initially are starting to use cheese now. And because it also marks up the pricing and marks up the general appeal of a restaurant, most people will, of course, tend to switch to using a bit more cheese on their dishes.
Okay.
And it is, of course, a very, very good substitute for protein as well. Remember, as opposed to consuming milk in its raw form, cheese is also a very, very good way to enjoy consuming milk products.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing about this meal, I think it's too much protein.
Well, as I mentioned, not also very important to mention, this is not one particular meal that I would recommend for people who are not conversant or big fans of enjoying cheese.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, it's also a very, very good substitute for a dinner meal. So being that it's got all this protein, you of course wouldn't be able to consume this in one sitting for breakfast.
Yeah.
So it also now acts as a very, very good cushion to maybe substituting your protein diet or your dinner meals.
With cheese. With
cheese, of course. So you can actually serve this as it is with, once it's cooked, you can serve it with a bit of salad, you can have some bread on the side.
Yeah.
And for days that you're feeling very lazy, maybe you're not very, very amped about cooking, you're looking for something just to get you by through the night, something such as this will actually be nice and nutritious. It's also very, very heavy. And the best part of it is it's also homemade.
It's also homemade.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you look at how much of homemade ingredients that go into this, it just basically complements home cooking. Yeah.
So can I make my own cheese at home?
You can actually make your own cheese at home.
The cream that you take from the milk,
exactly.
Like the cow milked milk, not the processed one.
There's actually videos out now that people, like for instance, making your own feta at home is very possible. I actually do my own cream cheese from home.
Yeah, because growing up, we'd always collect it, but I used it for baking though. So it would,
for baking
it would be in a container in the fridge, and then I'd notice it.
Scoop it into dough and
and it would change color if it stayed too much. It would be like yellow. Yes.
That's basically cheese forming. Yeah, that's it.
Oh,
right now, before we continue. Very important that we throw this in the oven. So I'm just going to slide this into our oven And very important to also mention, always push it to the very, very back.
Okay.
That's basically where the heat is more intense.
Okay.
And then we'll pretty much set our timer for about 30 minutes, but we will of course check it in between. Very important to also mention, especially when setting the time on your oven, remember some dishes may not, of course, some recipes of course may not give you the exact details as to how long to cook a dish. So I always prefer to use the very, very simple logics that I've always used in time. One is particularly by checking for the texture and checking for the color of the dish, as well as checking for the smell of the dish. So these are particularly very, very good and handy tips to make sure that your baking experience never goes wrong. But we will of course cut the story short at this point. We will give you this chance to take a break, but when we do come back, I will of course be able to show you the completed version of our quiche, or rather our oven baked omelette. And I'll also take you through the very, very simple serving suggestions and give you also some very, very handy tips to remember when making your next omelette. So do not touch that dial. We'll be right back.
It's actually nice. I like that I can
How's
taste
the seasoning? How's
the seasoning is perfect.
Uh-huh.
I like that I can taste all the ingredients.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and everything is like, it has a crunchy feeling to it. I think it's because of the cheese,
Exactly,
the fact that it has
that crust
baked
on the top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so smooth and
Creamy.
very nice and creamy. Yes.
Perfect. Now with that said and done, we pretty much have come to the last and final part of the show. And of course, it's very important that I do enlighten you on how you can also be able to get the opportunity to join us on the show. But I will of course allow Megan to do the honors. Megan? Hello viewers and welcome back. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've pretty much done most of what we needed to do, and we're right at the last and final part of plating. But very important that I remind you, you can of course be able to recap on this particular episode much later in the future, and you can be able to do so by subscribing to our YouTube channel, that's BrandPlus TV Kenya. There you should be able to find this and many more beautiful recipes to try out at home. Now of course, coming back to the dish of the hour, we're pretty much done baking, and this has now been cooking for about 20 to 22 minutes. So we're going to begin by taking it out of the oven. I'm just going to set it before us just for you all to be able to see what the complete dish looks like. As I mentioned, very important that you get the beautiful golden color at the top.
Okay.
And if I can be able to just lift that off the counter, you can of course also be able to see right through to the very base that
Yes.
it's actually fully cooked.
Yes.
And all that's left to do is basically to plate.
Okay.
So I'm going to begin by slicing it right through the center. And of course, detach the ends.
So when you're putting the cheese,
Uh-huh.
I actually forgot to ask you. Is there like what's supposed to go first? Which cheese is supposed to go first,
No,
or
not at all.
you just throw them
You
in
just
there?
throw them in there.
Ah, okay,
Yeah, you just
okay.
throw them in there.
Okay.
But the most important part, of course, to mention is the cheese, of course, is basically forming a crust to the omelette.
Okay.
And basically, it pretty much allows for you to be able to get the two sides of the omelette. So you get the very basic bottom, which is all egg. And then it, of course, breaks the consistency of the crispy texture at the top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looks
Right.
nice. Well,
Thank you.
golden, and it's together.
And it's together.
Yeah.
Right, so very simply, we lift that off our bowl and straight onto the plate. Simple as that. And all you need to do now is just finish by adding the very, very nitty-gritties, which is basically some toasted bread that will always complement an omelette very well. You can, of course, also serve that with a bit of salad. It will also complement the dish quite well. And just to finish that off, we're going to just pretty much garnish that very simply right over the top with a sprig of mint. And that, of course, brings us to the last and final part of the dish for today. I hope you've had some fun.
Yes, I have had some fun.
But of course, very importantly, I will, of course, use you as the dummy at the moment. And I'm going to ask you to try just a little bit of the egg, just to give us an idea of what you think about the overall flavor.
Okay.
Right, let's go for it.
All right. It's a bit hot, but I'm
small
trying to
bite.
grasp everything. It's actually nice. I like that I can
How's
taste.
the seasoning? How's
The seasoning is perfect. I like that I can taste all the ingredients. And yeah, and everything is like, it has a crunchy feeling to it. I think it's because of the cheese, the fact that it has
crust
baked.
on the top.
Yeah, and it's so smooth and
Creamy.
very nice. And creamy, yes.
Perfect. Now, with that said and done, we pretty much have come to the last and final part of the show. And of course, it's very important that I do enlighten you on how you can also be able to get the opportunity to join us on the show. But I will, of course, allow Megan to do the honors. Megan?
Yes. The only thing that you do is that just text your name and what meal you'd like to learn how to make on the number on your screen. And yes, they will call you and you'll be part of this show.
So you can actually stand to be a witness that we do actually get back to our viewers.
Yes. You called me, I think, within 2 days. Was it 2 days? Yes. Yes.
Perfect. And I hope you've managed to also learn something new on the show as well as have some fun on the show.
Definitely. Today I have a new way of cooking eggs.
Perfect. Now, with that said and done, I will, of course, leave you with a very, very small reminder. Do remember you can share your views, your suggestions, or any particular comments pertaining the show through our Facebook page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. And remember, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's plenty more videos of such beautiful dishes that you can also be able to recreate from your very own home kitchens. But from us at the studios, it's a goodbye. See you soon, and until the next episode, stay blessed.